Welcome back. This video actually contains 3 separate bashes that I made as part of this process. So this one I started with one of the Kitbash 3D buildings, a robot, and a seashell. It was actually a photogrammetry of a seashell, and I immediately identified this relationship between the top of the robot and the building. It seemed like that could be a pretty interesting ground plane. So I just spent a moment experimenting a bit with the placements of the 3 pieces, just kind of testing the seashell around, maybe thinking about how I might want to use it. I actually decided I wanted to bring in a different seashell that I'd already downloaded. It took me a second to remember where I had saved it, but I felt like this one maybe had a little bit more potential, and so I just kind of added it there to the leg. As I was going around this, though, I started feeling that I wasn't really in love with how this was shaping up. I decided to modify the robot a bit by deleting that top area and scaling up that architecture. I put the seashell on the back and just kind of continued playing around with the scale. I decided this was a good time to go ahead and establish a camera, though, and a studio backdrop, so I went ahead and did that. While the camera cut there, I actually had remeshed the geometry together and increased the polygon count to a pretty high degree. This is already at 16 million tries. So after I had done that, I went through and sculpted a bit, and I decided I would put a gold material on this. Just went ahead and put a simple glossy material and made it a nice gold color. I've been experimenting around with some different camera angles, just kind of feeling out what my favorite sides of the piece were, but I decided that I wasn't really still in love with the composition. I went through and tried sculpting some more on it, but nothing could really salvage it. So I decided I would duplicate it and remesh the geometry, which resulted in this kind of low poly but interesting formwork. I actually decided that I would use that then as a kind of ground piece or a rock that I would use as a site in this exercise. You'll see there I had done an operation that froze up the file for a second, but I just went through and I actually removed the legs from that robot, the duplicated robot. The original now is the tiny one in the bottom middle. I was getting happier with this relationship between all the pieces, but I decided that I would remesh this again to increase the polygon count. I knew I wanted to give some texture to these otherwise rigid facets on the geometry, so I just loaded up some textures into the brush and in the sculpting brush and started sculpting around. I eventually settled on this kind of tentacly texture from like an octopus texture here, and I just painted that around with the sculpting tools. I decided this one I would use an orthographic camera, so I just went to the camera settings, changed the type from perspective to orthographic, and put it in the sky above it. After that, I started just positioning a few of the ducks around. I figured they would be a fun addition, like it was their duck home here. I was actually really happy with this composition pretty quickly. I think the gold and the pink just worked well together, and then the ducks became nice accent pieces. It even was nice that it was hovering a bit at the bottom. After this, I decided I would save it and go on to a new run. This one I wanted to really make a lot more use out of the duck specifically. So I scaled the duck way up and I took some of the signs off of this building and I just started positioning the signs around the duck. I had decided that this was going to be the main composition. And I just started taking some of the other elements and positioning them around. You'll notice I even left the windows in their original position because I thought they had a really nice and kind of intricate composition there. I was starting to think through how I might capture this one, and I thought of it more as like a scene, so I actually imported some more photogrammetry of this architecture here and put it around the duck. I quickly then established some render settings and put another orthographic camera on this, but this time an elevation view from the front. I imported in a big robot to add some mechanical detail into the background, and decided that it and the architecture should become the same material. As I was playing around, I wanted to bring in a few more objects. I decided that this composition just wasn't quite there yet, so I brought in this squid. I kept repositioning those window pieces in the front, but really now I was using the squid to cover up the messy edges on the photogrammetry. I brought in a little bit more photogrammetry just to add some additional detail on the side, and I just decided that this one was going to be a busier a busier piece. So I actually spent some time and brought in a number of different models. Like you'll see pieces of wood, a heart, and I was continuing to play around with some of the colors. Here I started experimenting even more with those window elements, making copies of them and placing them around. I decided that the octopus was a little bit too textureless, so I actually added some sculpting texture to it to give it a little bit more roughness. I decided this would be a fun one to hide a bunch of ducks around in the scene, and so I just started copying the ducks and scaling them and sitting them around on different geometries. I was actually kind of liking the all white, especially when I started putting the ducks in. They stood out really nicely against the white backdrop. I thought it would be fun to go ahead and put some hair on one of the ducks in the scene. I was getting ready to record the hair tutorial, so I just went ahead and went through and gave this duck in the background a nice blue mohawk. Then when his mohawk turned blue, I decided that everything else should probably turn pink. So really that was just a compositional decision towards the end after I had placed some of the ducks. But I'll be curious if you can count how many ducks are actually in the scene. I hit a couple of them really well. This third bash is almost entirely just architecture pieces, so it's a bit messier, and I didn't really spend very much time on this one at all. I just started moving the different building pieces around, and I wasn't really going for anything in particular, but I knew that it would lead into something interesting if I just kept mashing buildings together. This one turned into a really chaotic city center really quickly, and I was just copying the pieces around over and over again, and I really quickly established another orthographic camera from the top, which gives it a near isometric visual appearance. For this one, I decided I would make the ground a nice shiny metallic-y ground, and I spent some time getting the camera close in to give it some extreme focal blur to make it feel tiny and miniaturized. Of course, the necessary and missing ingredient to this one was a large duck ready to take over the city.